May it please the court,
Yes.
counsel, members of the jury. Jared Brightigan was murdered. Henry Tenen murdered Jared Brightigan. Mario Fernandez had no motive. He had no desire. He had no reason, and he certainly gained no benefit from the death of Jared Brightigan. In the first 15 seconds of Mr. Hill's opening statement to all of you, that's exactly what he said. And it rings as true at the beginning of my closing statement to you all as it did when Mr. Hill told you that. Because what he told you was that the evidence that you had not seen yet would show that Jared Brightigan had been murdered, that Henry Tenen had murdered Jared Brightigan, and that there would be no reason for Mr. Fernandez to do this. And after you've seen all of the evidence in this case, and you've been presented even with the first closing argument, Mario Fernandez had no motive to do this. He had no reason to do it, and he got no benefit. So I'd like to walk you through what we expect the judge is going to read you, the law in this case. And then I'm going to walk you through all the facts we heard so we can determine whether or not the government met their burden, whether they told you just a series of half-truths every single day and didn't tell you the whole story until we would get up and ask the witness questions, get the whole story out, the whole picture. So let's walk through what I expect the law to be. The law is so important in this case because you have to take all of the information that you heard and with no doubt in your mind, in order to convict Mr. Fernandez, each and every one of the elements we're about to go over must be met. And I found it so important that we don't ever hide the law from you, that during my entire closing statement, the law will be right here, right behind me. So at any given moment, if you want to ask yourself, was there actually any evidence that Jared Brightigan is dead? Of course there is. That is not in dispute. There is no reasonable doubt that Jared Brightigan is dead. The death was caused by the criminal act of Mario Fernandez. There's all the reasonable doubt in the world that this criminal act wasn't caused by Mr. Fernandez. The state has told you that Mr. Fernandez did not do any act that caused Jared Brightigan to die. And there was a premeditated killing of Jared Brightigan. While we're walking through, you have to determine whether there was a premeditated killing that Mr. Fernandez, prior to the murder, wanted Jared Brightigan dead. So we know that Mario Fernandez did not kill Jared Brightigan. That is not in dispute. So then the state attorney relies on what is a principal instruction. And the principal instruction says, if Mario Fernandez helped Henry Tenen commit a crime, then he's a principal, and he must be treated as if he had done it. So I'll concede that they're going only on the principal instruction because clearly Mr. Fernandez did not kill Jared Brightigan. So how do they do that? What do they have to prove to you with no doubt? What must you be convinced of at the highest level of our justice system that you will leave this courtroom with no doubt in your mind, that you are convinced beyond all doubt? You have to know that Mario Fernandez intended for this crime to occur. So when we're walking through the facts this afternoon, ask yourselves, What single fact before February 16th of 2022 did you hear one witness say that Mario Fernandez wanted this crime to occur? What witness took the witness stand and said, or heard, or a wire call, anything, any piece of evidence where you heard Mr. Fernandez say, I want that son of a bitch dead. I'll do anything to kill Jared Bridegan. I hate him. He deserves to die. Any number of disgusting, foul statements that we always hear in murder cases. Ask yourselves, what one singular statement did you hear so that you could know beyond all doubt that Mr. Fernandez intended this crime to occur prior to February 16th?
Your Honor, I'm objecting to misstatement of the law for the third time.
You want to be heard?
No, I'll reread the instruction, Your Honor.
So I'll sustain the objection.
The defendant intended the crime to occur. And then second, the defendant did not act, did some act, or said something that was intended to, and that did incite, cause, encourage, assist, advise the other person to actually commit the crime. That's what the judge is going to read you. That's what you have to know beyond all reasonable doubt. And while we're walking through this, please ask yourselves over and over again, what fact did we hear that Mr. Fernandez did some act that encouraged or caused or assisted this crime to occur? That you heard on a wire call, that you heard a witness say that he did, that he incited, that he did any of these things. And then the second charge is criminal solicitation. And in the criminal solicitation count, the government has alleged that on between November 1st and February 16th of 2022, right off the rip, what evidence did you hear in this case about anything that happened in November of 2021? What one piece of evidence did you hear of anything that happened in November? And I'm going to submit to you there was none. What one piece of evidence did you hear in this case that anything happened in December of 2021? Why has the government alleged that there's some period of solicitation when they didn't show you one single piece of evidence for 2 months? And then I'll concede the first piece of evidence that they showed you during this time period is somewhere around January 5th, and we'll talk about that. But you have to ask yourself while we're walking through these facts, and most importantly, while you're deliberating, what one piece of evidence did you hear? Go back, please. That Mario Fernandez solicited Henry Tenen to commit this offense. What call? What text? What meeting? What witness? What did you ever hear that Mario Fernandez solicited Henry Tenen to do anything? I'm going to submit to you, you didn't. It did not happen. There was no evidence. And when they say the checks are post the homicide. Checks, there is no check. And I very carefully went through, and we'll talk more about the checks, but just to give you some...
Mr. Dreiser, pause for a moment.
Flash for a second. Take your time now. It's all the way down. The floor. It's just a loose connection.
There you go. There you go. There you go. There you go.
I won't touch it. Don't touch it. No, leave it. I gotta be able to see it. Thank you.
You may proceed.
Thank you. So first, they have to prove to you that Mario Fernandez solicited him in some way. Before the homicide, he went to him and said, hey, I want you to commit this particular crime. And there is no evidence whatsoever of a conversation, a solicit, a meeting where a solicitation took place. None. And then, on top of that, they have to prove to you, convince you, so that there is no doubt in your mind that during that meeting, that solicitation, that time period, that event that they've never been able to prove to you happened, that Mario Fernandez commanded, encouraged, or hired, or requested Henry Tenen to engage in this specific conduct, which would constitute first-degree murder. They first have to prove to you that there's some meeting that took place that you've seen no evidence of. And then they have to tell you exactly what happened at that meeting or during that call.
Objection, Your Honor. It's a misstatement of the law.
This is my argument as to the
Hold
element.
on. Let me see your sidebar really quick. All right, I overrule the state's objection. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. The law that's been in front of you this entire time says is that they have to prove so that there is no doubt in your mind that Mr. Fernandez solicited Mr. Tenen to commit this crime, and then the specifics of what happened during that solicitation. They have to prove to you that Mr. Fernandez in some way commanded, encouraged, hired, requested to engage in this specific conduct. And that's what the law is. It will be behind me the entire time I give my closing argument, and I ask you to think to yourselves, what evidence did I hear at all that I could know without any doubt in my mind that these crimes were committed and that every element has been satisfied by the government? There is no question that the facts of this case are sad. There is no question that there was a child in the car. There is no question that an innocent man was gunned down in a dark street on a night in which he least expected it. We concede that fact. We don't dispute that fact. And what the judge is going to read to you is that although those things may be true, and we're not asking you to ignore them, when you go back to deliberate, you can only decide this case upon the evidence that you have heard, the testimony of the witnesses, and that you've seen in the form of exhibits and testimony and evidence. But this case must not be decided for or against anyone because you feel sorry for anyone or are angry at anyone. And your verdict should not be influenced by feelings of prejudice, bias, or sympathy. Your verdict must be based on evidence and the law contained in those instructions. So although we concede how sad this case is, the judge is going to instruct you that you cannot take those feelings and use them in any way to be biased or prejudiced against Mr. Fernandez or the evidence that is or is not applicable to him. So real briefly, we started this case with this family law motive that Shanna and the history of their family law case. So very briefly, Shanna and Jared Brighting got married in 2010. That's the history. 2 twins were born of this marriage, AB and LB, in 2012, and Shanna filed for a petition to dissolve her marriage with Jared in 2015. The court entered a consent final judgment ordering equal time sharing. And although that doesn't seem like an important fact of this case, it may be the most important fact because as the state has told you, the motive for Mr. Fernandez to commit this murder is because they weren't happy with the child custody arrangement. But the fact is, the evidence in this case is nothing consistent with that fact. Because when Shanna and Mario get married, that's in 2018. So all of what we just went over before, Mr. Fernandez didn't even know about. It wasn't facts that he was aware of. But he does get married, and over the years, there are modifications and changes. And we went through those together, and every single one of them is in this binder. The entire docket sheet is in the binder, and all the applicable pleadings that we talked about and the state was free to put into evidence, any that they talked about. Not one time does Shanna Gardner or Mario Fernandez attempt in any way to change the custody agreement between Shanna Gardner and Jared Brightigan. They're right. They did argue once over who should pay for an oxygen machine. Ms. Stifler said they litigated that issue. No, they did not. I showed you that pleading, and then I quickly showed you that they came to an agreement, meaning they asked the court for litigation, and then the two parties on their own decided who to pay for it, and they agreed. No question that not one single time did Ms. Gardner ever say, I think it would be better to take away time sharing from Jared Brightigan. Never. Not one time. And in fact, I showed you that in the pleadings in which they did talk about time sharing, she repeatedly asked the court to keep a 50-50 time sharing. And in one pleading I showed you, she went out of her way to say, it's working really well. We just want to switch the days. So when you hear the rhetoric that this is about a child custody battle, what you should be hearing is that when Ms. Gardner or Jared Brightigan had any issues that they wanted changed, they went to court. They filed pleadings, and they either agreed on their own, which is what happened in every single situation, or their intended purpose was to ask the court to rule. You didn't hear one time that there was any self-help where Mario Fernandez threatened Jared Brightigan, said, if you don't agree to this, I'm going to do this to you. And in fact, this family law case had been closed for over 4 months, completely closed, with no filings prior to the homicide of Jared Brightigan. There wasn't a single family law dispute going on at the time of the homicide. I thought it would be helpful when we go through all the witnesses. I would show a picture so it would help us do a visualization of who we're talking about and what they said. First witness, if you may recall, was Ms. Cruz. She was a scene witness. She got there. She placed a 911 call. It's obvious she didn't know what had happened. She took great care of BB. She did not see anyone leaving, and we asked her no questions. Because as we promised you in the beginning, if we didn't think it aided you in determining the law with the facts of this case, we did not want to waste your time. Then Mr. Borgia took the stand. He was also a scene witness. He didn't see anyone leaving, and we didn't ask him any questions. The next witness was Sergeant Smith. He was a responding officer, and what I noted from his testimony is he just said how dark that road was and how dark that road was. And you have to ask yourself, why was it so important that they kept talking about how dark that road was? It's because the government cannot prove to you who the people who were involved in this crime were. They don't know who was driving that truck. So they want it to be known how dark it was. But then when I got up, I said, it's not dark all over Jack's Beach, is it? And he's like, no, there's street lights all over Jack's Beach, isn't that correct? Yeah. There's surveillance at the police station. You can see just fine. That's correct. Because there's plenty of light in Jack's Beach to determine, if they could, who was involved in this crime. And what the evidence in this case is, it's not Mario Fernandez. It's Henry Tenon and an unknown person who was driving that truck. We'll talk more about that. Then you heard from Ms. Brightigan. Ms. Brightigan told you that there were thousands of text messages in a group family chat, meaning that they communicated regularly. Shanna Gardner, Kirsten Brightigan, Mario Fernandez, and Jared Brightigan. Not one single threat of violence. She couldn't articulate one time where there was an act of violence, that Mr. Fernandez did something that made her nervous or made her afraid or said something threatening, like, if you don't drop the kids off at this time. Because I asked her, what were they mostly scheduling? And she said, yeah, medical appointment stuff, yeah. In thousands, there wasn't one time where where this alleged murderer just kept his cool all the time. He never one time made a threat. One time did an act of violence that she could articulate. No physical confrontations between Mr. Fernandez and Jared Bridegan. I said, did he ever report to you that he threatened him or confronted him? No. She showed that the family law case was closed 4 months before. There was no arguments about this upcoming baptism. She said Mr. Fernandez and Ms. Gardner were calm about it. Ms. Gardner took AB dress shopping. And this is an important fact. I said, did you go over to the Fernandez residence the day after this homicide? She's like, I did. I asked if I could go over there so we could all deliver the news to the children together. And I said, did they agree? And she said, yes, they did. They invited Miss Bridegan into their home at her request, meaning she wasn't afraid of Shanna Gardner. She wasn't afraid of Mario Fernandez. She asked, can I come into your home? Can we do this together? And they said yes. They included her in that. But what you later learned in the interview of Mr. Fernandez, where I'll admit he is a little angry. He is a little uncomfortable about what happened, because with the grace that they showed Miss Bridegan, she did not in return. She would not allow Miss Gardner to attend the funeral of Jared Bridegan with her daughter. And there is no question that after the grace Mr. Fernandez and Miss Gardner showed Miss Bridegan, she did not return that grace, and he was frustrated about that. And then they made a big deal that there was a suggestion of death filed in this case. Per the rules of Florida court, when there's a child in the family law system and there are pleadings regarding those child, you file what's called a suggestion of death, letting the court know that one of the parties had passed. That is all it means. It doesn't mean anything else. You heard from Dr. Gillespie. He was the medical examiner in this case. He confirmed what we've all been talking about, that in fact Jared Bridegan was murdered, and we asked him no questions. Then you heard from Detective Jarman. He was an evidence technician who went to the scene. He talked about what the scene looked like, what he had did. He had done a walkthrough. He said a picture is worth 1,000 words, and that's why it was important for him to videotape in case it had any evidentiary value. And he participated in carefully collecting DNA from the scene. Next, we heard from Corporal Wallace. This is the witness who compiled all of the surveillance in this case. He headed up the task force of people that went from business to business, from residence to residence, to collect every piece of possible surveillance that they could find in this case so that they could attempt to connect Mario Fernandez to the homicide of Jared Bridegan. And he told you just how carefully he had done that. And they had, on direct examination, they had asked him, well, what do you convert times to make sure everything lines up? Yes, I took great care to do that. I added up times. I subtracted UTC to format it so everyone could get a good idea what's happening. And of course, the video was wrong. First question I asked him, sir, you said that you took great care and precision to do this. Do you think precision is important? Yes, I do. You think accuracy is important? Yes, I do. You agree with me that this video is incorrect? Yes, it's wrong. Well, what's wrong? Is it not the truck that's pulling out, or is it the time? It's the time. On the video, if you recall, before I got up on cross-examination, it looked like the truck pulls out, and then they show a map, and then they showed it on fairway. But it wasn't until we got up. There's 36 minutes that we had to tell you, you have no idea where that blue truck is prior to the homicide. When that truck pulls out of Pablo Hamlet for 36 minutes, you don't know where it is. And then I went out of my way to say, okay, well, the state's alleging that there's no surveillance at a gravel parking lot. Were there any reports that a vehicle was in that gravel parking lot? No, sir. You had mentioned that there's a long street along the golf course where there's no surveillance. You had mentioned that that's a busy road at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night on a Wednesday night. That's 15th. That's right. Did you get one report, one Crime Stopper tip, any information that a Ford F-150 that's been blasted on the internet and the news was just randomly parked along that way? No, no information. So this whole time, the government gets up here and they're like, Mr. Fernandez didn't report the F-150. Mr. Fernandez didn't report the F-150. Nobody reported the F-150. Jimmy Jones, where the truck was found, didn't report an F-150. It's because there are thousands of F-150s, and the surveillance really wasn't all that clear that was released to the media. But there is no evidence that in this case, a truck, an F-150, two-toned in color, on the night of the homicide was anywhere near the Fernandez residence, anywhere parked on the roadway, and certainly not at the Cradle Creek Preserve. They just throw these things out there, and they expect you to say, well, it could have been. Now, it's interesting. When they want to do could have beens, they say you can't do that. The jury instruction is going to tell you it's not a forced doubt, it's not a speculative doubt, it's not an imaginary doubt, until they want you to fill in the gaps of the evidence and say there's a blue truck parked at a gravel parking lot. No evidence of that whatsoever. They just want you to believe that without ever giving you a single piece of evidence that that's true. Today, in the beginning of Ms. Stifler's opening statement, she said, you can believe that, and you can believe that. She was like Oprah Winfrey handing out vehicles. You get a car, you get a car. It's not how it works. It's not you get to believe this, you get to believe that. We have evidence. That's what all of this is. They spent 6 days trying to establish that Mr. Fernandez participated in this crime, and that's what you have to know. You have to know, or at least be presented with something so that you could believe that during that 36-minute period of time, Mr. Fernandez had something to do with this crime. But the answer is they just don't know. They have no idea where that truck was. They have no idea who was in that truck. And they just want you to guess or fill in the gaps in your mind. Ms. Stifler told you very on in her opening statement this morning, you can use reasonable inferences. I'm going to tell you that I'm going to read a lot of law to you, and when I'm done and Mr. Mizrahi's done, the judge is going to read you a bunch of jury instructions. You listen. See if you ever hear the word, you can take and use reasonable inferences. See if you ever hear that this afternoon, because I submit to you, you will not. You will never hear the judge say, yeah, you can just do reasonable inferences and jump from fact to fact. That is not something that you're going to hear. That's just something that they told you because they want you to do that, because they didn't meet their burden in this case. The next, and I wasn't trying to be a stickler about all the little mistakes in this case, but my client is charged with first-degree murder, which is the highest crime that you can be charged with in this country. So when they make all the mistakes about the times that we have to point out, and if it's in evidence, and when you look at the CD, it says, State of Florida, State Lieutenant Gardner Hernandez. They don't even get his name right. And is that the biggest deal in the world? No, but it's one mistake after the next mistake that we have to keep pointing out to you because the government was careless. They're not taking the time to make sure that in this case, all the T's are crossed, the I's are dotted, and that they have their evidence in order. It's just one mistake after the next. And then it shows, after we corrected it, that it's 8 o'clock when the truck pulls off. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. Pablo Hamlet is on surveillance. It runs all the time. And they want you to believe that that's the area of interest. But yet, You never see Mr. Fernandez at Pablo Hamlet. You never see a person running from his residence to the Ford F-150, from the Ford F-150 back to the residence. No evidence of that. So what does the government do when they have absolutely no evidence that Mr. Fernandez ever gets to that truck or ever gets back to his home or goes back from his home back to the truck? I mean, let's just talk about it. What they're telling you is, and we'll get to his phone, trust me, but his phone goes off, then his phone goes back on, then she wants you to believe that there's a second gap, his phone goes off, his phone goes back on. He's home. But if you want to believe what the government's trying to convince you to believe, he has to be running all around Jack's Beach. Detective Johns told you that when the phones finally connect, one phone pings over by Mojo's. The other phone is over by the police station where Henry Tennant is. They want you to believe it's Mario Fernandez who's over there by Mojo's, and somehow, like a ghost in the night, he never is seen. So think about what they keep asking you to do. In that video, when the truck pulls off, all of a sudden Detective Johns is like, it pulled into a gravel lot. And I said, you can't even see in that video the vehicle stop. And he's like, no, you can't. So what makes you think it stopped? He just told you. I think it stopped, even though I asked him right on the stand, you acknowledge that you can't see that video stop. That's correct. You have any evidence that it ever stopped there? No. He just wants you to believe it because that's something you'd have to imagine because he wants it to be true because it's nowhere else. Go back. I asked them what no criminal defense attorney ever does. You ask questions you know the answers to. And I looked at him and I said, tell me, after that truck pulls off, you believe it doesn't leave for hours. Where does the truck go? What did he tell you? I don't know. I think it pulled into a lot. There is no evidence of Mr. Fernandez out and about, the blue truck, for approximately 3 hours after you last see that truck pull out of Pablo Hamlet when it just backs up, turns around, and pulls forward. So like we said, there's no surveillance. I showed a video, if you recall, of the truck passing a sidewalk by the police station. And I said, count how many people are on the sidewalk. And it was 7. 7 people in that one clip were right next to that truck, and not a single person reports seeing Mr. Fernandez, a person who's been blasted all over the news and the media, saying, I saw him that night. He was in that truck. Not a single person. This is 7 o'clock at Jack's Beach. This isn't a time period where it's in the middle of the night and no one would see him. And then I showed you all what area they had pulled into. Mr. Fernandez is going to be running from his home, across Discovery School, back to a truck at the area of interest, and it's not caught on surveillance. It's not seen. He's not seen by any one of the people in the 40 or 50 windows that are in just that building, in the smokers pavilion. Do you remember when I asked the detective about, Corporal Wallace, about that smoking pavilion? And I said, it was 7 o'clock at night. Not a single person in an area where people congregate and smoke, which is, 30 feet from where the car was parked? And he said, oh, I don't think people smoke at night. Have you ever met a smoker? Do they stop smoking at 6 o'clock? That's what they're trying to do. When they cannot give you evidence or an answer in this case, they just say whatever they want, including smokers stop smoking at around 7 o'clock on a Wednesday night. And you have to ask yourself, how credible is that if someone's willing to tell me something we know just isn't true? Am I to rely on this kind of evidence to convict Mr. Fernandez of first-degree murder? That's for you to decide. And then he collected so much, if you go back, so much surveillance that they caught. In this video, it's really small, but it's all there, back there in evidence, and every witness agreed. When Mrs. Brightigan pulls into the police station, you can see Henry Tennant in the same frame of Mrs. Brightigan pulling into the police station. If you stop it, you can see Henry Tennant on the sidewalk, and you can see Miss Bridegan's vehicle. And I'm not suggesting to you that that's some fact that you should believe that Miss Bridegan is involved. I'm not. But ask yourselves this. If they had Henry Tenen and Mario Fernandez in the same frame on the night of the homicide, how many times would they play that for you? They would say that is all the evidence that you need. And they collected so much surveillance that they actually got the killer and the widow in the same frame on the night of the homicide, and they can't show you one piece of evidence that connects Mario Fernandez on the night of the homicide to the crime scene, to the truck, to the route, to a gravel lot, to the Cradle Creek Preserve. Nothing, except for that Mario Fernandez is at his house. That's how much surveillance the government collected in this case. And then they want you just to believe it's just chance luck that he's a ghost in the night. And that's not reasonable. Then we heard from Detective Burrell. He said that he collected the tire at the Potomac house. He told you that who was there when he collected it, and that he went to the home, knocked on the door, and who was at the house when he got there? Mario Fernandez and Miss Garden. So when they say, we have no idea where Mr. Fernandez was the night of the homicide, yes, you do. You know exactly where he was. They have him traveling at 5:45, and we'll get there on Beach Boulevard, going back to his house. He never leaves. His phone never leaves. And when law enforcement, who they told you, they don't call and say, hey, we're on our way over. They don't know when they're going to pop in. When they popped in, who was there? Mr. Fernandez. So when you hear over and over again, we don't know, they told you in the opening statement, we don't know where Mr. Fernandez is. They told you in the first close, we don't know where he is. You do know. He's at home because witnesses saw him at home. And I don't want to jump too far ahead, but while we're talking about it, Mr. Fernandez's interview said that he was home. And then you say, well, maybe he would lie. How do we know he's not lying? We know he's not lying because he said, when the children came in, I talked with them. And they told me that Jared Bridegan took a 20-minute or so phone call during the date night. And then I asked Detective Johns, did you confirm whether that was true? And he said, yeah, he had to take a work call during the date night. How in the world could Mr. Fernandez know that there was a call during date night unless the daughter told him when he got home that there was a call during date night? So now you know he's home because he said he was home. The facts confirm that he was home. His phone is at the location, and Detective Burrell, sure enough, knocks on the door, and Mario Fernandez is there. He's not acting nervous. He's not sweating. He's not doing anything evasive. He's not fumbling with his phone. Not one single detail could they offer you that suggested their favorite phrase, that Mr. Fernandez had consciousness of guilt. None. He answered the door. He spoke with detectives, and there was nothing unusual whatsoever about the encounter. And they looked at the evidentiary ring doorbell. They shared it with him, and he said he just didn't see anything of evidentiary value. Then we got to meet Detective Chris Johns. There is going to be a jury instruction that the judge is going to read you that I want to point out now, because this is the point in the trial where you have to ask yourself, was the witness honest and straightforward in answering the attorney's questions? That's your job to determine that. But I suggest to you that when the government had a question for Detective Johns, he had no problem answering it. Can you tell me about these FBI cast slides? Sure, I'd be glad to. Then I ask him, can you tell me just, some basic information? Oh, we should leave that for Agent Blythe. If they wanted it, he had no problem answering their questions. If I just wanted a simple answer to a simple question, he just wouldn't give it to me. I had to walk through 30 minutes of a bank account, an irrevocable trust yesterday that had no $50,000 transfer out of it. Didn't occur. He could have just said, there's no $50,000 transfer. But he wouldn't. He was not straightforward in answering my questions. And that is one of the factors in weighing the evidence in this case that I will ask you to consider when you go back and deliberate. He has no homicide experience. This was his first case. He's now a part-time employee. He works as a financial planner or a tax person. He acknowledges this was the biggest case of his career, and he had no experience handling a case like this. He acknowledged that there were thousands of Crime Stopper tips. He said sometimes people would just call and be like, I saw a Ford F-150 at the Home Depot, and there's nothing we could do with it. But that's how many tips they got. People in the area were willing to give any information they had, and yet not a single shred of evidence on the night of the homicide that anyone came into this courtroom and reported connecting Mr. Fernandez to the blue truck, to the scene, to the route, to the school, to the gravel parking lot, or any other place they want you to imagine that Mr. Fernandez may have been at. January 5th. This is the first date that I sort of had to go through because the government suggests this date has some importance. And remember, in the opening and this morning, Ms. Stifler will say to you, these are just snapshots in time. These are just snapshots of evidence. It's that way because the government made it that way. They're just showing you snapshots and then asking you to string together why our client is guilty. We are the ones that tried to show you the whole story. We're the ones who tried to show you poll camera footage from other days. We're the ones who tried to show you reasons why he would be doing X or Y or Z at other times. They want to show you certain dates that have certain reasons and certain values for whatever their prerogative is. So let's start at January 5th. Mr. Tenen, or his device, goes to the area of the Fernandez residence and Pablo Hamlet. Government told you that there would be no reason for him to do that other than his landlord lives there. And then they said, well, there was a phone call on January 4th. So if there's a phone call on January 4th, that means that this had something to do with the homicide. Or did it have to do with Mr. Fernandez calling and saying, dude, you haven't paid me in 3 months. Like, I'm meeting up with you, I'm getting my rent payment, or you're out of here. Government will get up and Mr. Mizrahi will say, there's no evidence of that. There's not. There's also no evidence that he went there for any nefarious purpose. There is evidence that he didn't go to the crime scene. So they want you to believe this was some practicing for the ambush. I don't know why Mr. Tenen was there, but he didn't see Mr. Fernandez. There's no cellular data suggesting Mr. Fernandez was home. There's no GPS showing that Mr. Fernandez was there. There's no evidence connecting Mr. Fernandez to January 5th whatsoever. And suspiciously, when Agent Blythe shows the GPS of January 5th, there's no confidence levels. So the one slide, they're just all blank. But it's the one slide, he's like, I think that Mr. Tenen was on their street. Their street is 300 feet long. And yet that day, he's like, I think he went on a street. And I was like, okay, if you're right, and he did go on their street, was he on there for more than 30 seconds? No. That's what you learned on January 5th, is that some tenant of Mr. Fernandez went to the area after knowing that he's owed him money, he's behind on his rent, and may have been on his street for 30 seconds. No evidence of where Mr. Fernandez is, no evidence of their communications on that day. And then Ms. Stifler says, we have communications on the 4th, we have none on the 5th, blame Mr. Fernandez. This is their investigation. This is their burden. They have to come up with communications. They have to come up with the evidence. They have subpoena power. They have warrant power. And they did it over and over again. But when they don't have evidence, they look to blame Mr. Fernandez. Then the next date is January 25th. Mr. Fernandez goes to John Biggerstaff's house. And they're like, well, it's only one reason could be to talk about a 10-millimeter firearm. He has known this man for 17, 18 years. They work out together. They have a cigarette every once in a while. They have a beer together. Mr. Fernandez helped with his son's upcoming wedding. Let's ignore that legitimate reason. They have known each other. They do things together. They do tile work together. They have done handyman work together, or at least Mr. Fernandez has hired Mr. Biggerstaff to do it when he was healthy and he owned a company, 904 Handyman. One reason after the next we were able to show you why he may have been over to that house has to be a 10 millimeter. That's what the government has to tell you. And of course, not to jump the gun, but we know why he went there one day, because it's on video. But when it's on video, they tell you, can't be for that reason. So whenever you show them the real reason, they tell you you shouldn't believe that, and you should make up something in your mind that's nefarious or criminal, when they cannot show you that they have any connection to nefarious or criminal activity between Mr. Fernandez and Mr. Biggerstaff. January 29th. On January 29th, Mr. Fernandez goes to the Potomac address. There's no dispute with that. Now, in this case, Agent Blythe will tell you that I don't track people, I track devices. And studies show that people are within arm's reach of their device. Sometimes they corrected me, because I would say, Mr. Tenen went to this place, or Mr. Tenen went to that place, or Mr. Fernandez was at this place or that place. And he would say, I don't know. I just know his device. But on the 29th, all of a sudden now, they throw out the studies, they throw out their own testimony, and they say, because he went there on a day that Mr. Tenen was doing something that obviously had something to do with the homicide. I don't dispute that. When we said it was a dry run and we're the ones who told you that. We were the first people to give you that information in this trial, to show you those slides. No dispute. But the detail is, number one, in a vacuum or a silo, looking at it independently, that would be a really bad fact if there was no evidence that Mr. Fernandez ever went to Potomac. That's not the case. So I painstakingly, and I acknowledge it was boring, and it was slow, and it was painful. I showed you the poll camera footage that showed you how often Mr. Fernandez would go to that location. Because it's not in a silo, and it's not in a vacuum, and it's not one day like January 29th. He was there regularly. So I showed him, and we didn't put up the poll camera. They did. There was no camera on January 29th. But if there was, it would show you exactly what I was able to show you, is that Mr. Fernandez goes there, he drops things off, he does work, he meets vendors. We showed the Bueller air conditioning guy show up. They've shown you that he bought a new air conditioner. Today, for the first time, they're making this big argument that who would get a contract for a one-year service agreement when you know or you end up selling the home. The contract and the service agreement is in evidence. And if you decide to look at the evidence list and look it up, another half-truth that they didn't share with you is when he paid $15,000 for his air conditioning unit, and you look at the service contract, it says 1 year maintenance included. But somehow, in the state's first close, that was some big point. Who pays for a 1 year service contract when you later sell the home? It came with it. That's what the continued theme of what they keep doing. They just tell you one little piece of evidence, and then when you look at the whole truth of the whole story, it doesn't add up. It's not what they're telling you. They didn't tell you that he goes there regularly. I mean, think about where they're tracking Mr. Fernandez in this case. They're either tracking him at the place he lives in Jack's Beach or a place he owns. They don't ever show you any information or evidence that he went somewhere where Mr. Fernandez shouldn't have been. They don't show you evidence that he met up in some murky pool hall in a part of town that he doesn't go to meet up with some character that he doesn't know. That does not exist in this case. He goes to a place that he owns, and he goes to a place that he lives. Those are the two places they have tracked Mr. Fernandez in this case, and that is it. They keep telling you, even as much as this morning, Ms. Stifler's like, and his phone was stationary. I don't know why they keep saying that. I asked Detective Johns and Agent Blythe, When a phone is in a band, in the pink bands, can you tell where the phone is? No. The technology isn't that good. If he's sweeping, I don't know if you guys remember, I was standing right here, and I said, if he's sweeping in his driveway, can you tell if the phone's moving? No, we can't tell. We just know that it's in the band. If he's moving boxes, if he's tiling, can you tell? But for whatever reason, they repeatedly just keep telling you that that phone was stationary at Potomac on the 29th because they want you to believe it so badly because there's no evidence that that phone left Potomac while Henry Tenen was doing whatever Henry Tenen was doing. And then, yes, I agree. A person could leave their phone at the Potomac place and leave it on and go with Henry Tenen. Is that possible? Sure. But you have to have evidence of that. And she's like, there's no way to get surveillance in retrospect a year later in St. Johns County. I don't know if that's true or not. You didn't hear any evidence that that's true. They didn't get any, so they want you to believe that. But there could be financial transactions. There can be people reporting, I saw a black man in an F-150 with a person that matches the description of Henry Tenen. There is no evidence. There's license plate readers that show the truck was there. They have the ability to match two pieces of evidence to a location. I went through that. They just don't have anything that lets Mr. Fernandez's device or himself leave that property, so they use words like it was stationary the whole time when you were told that's not possible to tell. And then ask yourself, so he's some big mastermind who turned off his phone on the night of the homicide because that somehow would protect him. He doesn't turn off his phone this particular time. What is it? Does he think that turning off your phone is helpful or leaving your phone on is not? It doesn't make any sense. They don't have a consistent theory. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. On February 15th, Mr. Fernandez goes to the Potomac address. He goes twice, and they wanted to make a big deal out of that. Number one, the first time he goes on the 15th, Henry Tenen's not there. If you recall, he's at Modison Pallets, the place that he works, and he's not even there. Well, that's unusual. The day before the homicide, why would Mr. Fernandez go to the residence that he owns, where Henry Tenen is staying with his best friend, Jeremy Ordway? We'll talk about that in a second. Why would he go there twice on that day? So I painstakingly showed you evidence that it is not uncommon for Mr. Fernandez to go twice to the residence when he's doing work. I was able to show you on 8-9 that he pulls in the morning at 7:46. He stays there for a period of time. And then on 8-9 at 2:05, several hours later, Mr. Fernandez comes back. This is showing you that it has nothing to do with the fact that it's the day before the homicide. It has nothing to do with that it's suspicious that Mr. Fernandez went there twice in one day. That's what Mr. Fernandez would do if it required him to do that for whatever reason he was doing it. And then they suggest to you today, well, there's just no reason he would ever go there. Look at the state of disrepair. He wasn't really doing any work there. That's not the evidence. The evidence on a poll camera that you saw that he didn't know was put up is that he pulls in, there's supplies get unloaded, they get taken in. You see Mr. Fernandez with this orange bucket, and he takes it, he's doing tile work, he dumps water out, you see him sweeping. There's another footage at the end where I just said to Detective John, would you agree he continues to do work? It's in evidence if you'd like to look at it. He has gloves on, he's literally carrying lumber from outside the house over the driveway and through. He's obviously doing work there. There is no dispute. But they don't like that fact, so they tell you, look at the state of disrepair. He wasn't doing a good job. He wasn't really doing work. Your own eyes will show you the work that he's doing with a camera that, thank God, they put up. On February 15th, this is the night that he goes over to Mr. Biggerstaff's house. They want you to believe that it had to be to pick up a 10 millimeter until when we went through all the evidence and we went through John Biggerstaff's phone, who somehow this morning, everything was wiped. There is no evidence. We could gain nothing from these people. No, they just didn't gain evidence that connects Mr. Fernandez to homicide. What they did gain is plenty of evidence. And in this evidence, there is a video of Mr. Fernandez. He's there that night, and he's doing whatever he's doing, and that's not the point. I'm not hiding it. If you recall, I'm the one who asked Detective Johns about it. But he's on video. You know exactly what he's doing there, and he's not picking up a 10 millimeter. And when I asked John Biggerstaff, did he owe you anything? Was he doing this because you were going to give him a gun? No, no, no. Detective Johns, did you have other evidence that Maria Biggerstaff was caught on video doing these things? Yes. This was the lifestyle that they chose to live. But when you actually know for an undisputed fact why Mr. Fernandez was there on the 15th, ignore that. It has to be because he picked up a 10 millimeter firearm that's not connected to this homicide. And we'll talk more about that. On the night of the homicide, Mr. Fernandez returns to his house at 5:45. He is there the entire night. There is no evidence that he left his home. Think about all of the different detectives that told you that they collected detailed evidence from the crime scene. People touch the little, the caps that are on the tire, we collected those. Not one person can connect you, Mr. Fernandez, to any piece of evidence that was left at the homicide scene, or most importantly, the blue truck. They used special vacuums, if you recall me asking the detective, with special filters so they could collect hair. They did fingerprint dusting. They did DNA testing of the steering wheel, the seats, the headrests. Not one piece of evidence connects Mr. Fernandez to ever being inside of that Ford F-150. And then I went one step further. I'm like, well, it's been a little while. Was there evidence that the vehicle was cleaned out, wiped, cleaned, vacuumed? No. It was side of a pigsty. No evidence that it was cleaned out. And yet they couldn't find one piece of evidence connecting Mr. Fernandez. And remember, when Mr. Fernandez goes in for his interview, it's voluntary. And they say, will you give us a DNA swab? And he says, no problem. And he gives us DNA. And according to the government, what they told you is he never thought he would ever get caught. So of course he would give a DNA swab. Well, if he was so willing to do that, knowing that he was inside of the blue truck, that doesn't make sense. And that's in conflict with what the government wants you to believe. Not a single eyewitness, not a single crime stopper, no DNA, no fingerprints, and he tells law enforcement he's home and he gives details about date night. Detective Johns, went on to say that they don't know where the F-150 went post-homicide, that an unknown driver pulled out of Pablo Hamlet, an unknown driver passes Ocean K, and they do not know where the truck went post the homicide. It's never to be seen again. If there's an unknown driver, okay, and unknown locations, 36-minute gaps, and then a vehicle that just disappears, if they don't know who the players in this case are, then they don't know what happened. And I mean the government doesn't know what happened. And when they say there's only one person that could connect Mr. Fernandez to these little details, it's impossible to say that when you don't know who the other person in the truck was. The other person in the truck could be connected to Shanna Gardner. The other person in the truck could be connected to Shanna Gardner's family. The other person in the truck could be connected directly to Jared Brightigan. And we would never know because we don't have their bank records. We don't have their DNA swab. We don't have their phone records. It's an unknown player that's not Mr. Fernandez. So when you go back there and you say, well, geez, out of all the gin joints in all the world, it's Mario Fernandez's, it's Henry Tenon is Mario Fernandez's tenant. So all this makes sense and we should just go along and make sure that we don't unstring the yarn or whatever it is that Ms. Stifler showed you at the end of the tapestry. The bottom line is, for the government to tell you that there's only one connection, they have to know who's involved, and they don't. Keep going. So the 10 millimeter firearm. How many times have you heard the government tell you it's an unaccounted for 10 millimeter firearm? Let me be very clear about this. The first thing they would have to do for this to have any evidentiary value is they have to tell you that John Biggerstaff's 10 millimeter firearm is connected to the homicide of Jared Bridegan. They have not done that. There are tens of thousands of 10 millimeter firearms in Glocks that have been produced since 1991, and they don't know which of any one of those it is that was involved in this homicide. So let's just start with that premise. Then the second thing the government would have to do is then connect Mr. Fernandez to John Biggerstaff's firearm. So what did we show you? We showed you that John Biggerstaff, in fact, did purchase a 10 millimeter firearm in 2016. Then he became, he was arrested. So this is the purchase of the Glock. This is the Glock that was put on the firearms affidavit, which of course is a big deal that it matches, because it would be a big deal if the government could show that John Biggerstaff bought a 10 millimeter, then filled out a firearms affidavit, and that firearm wasn't on it. That would be good evidence to suggest that he kept one of his guns. But that's not what the facts are. The facts are is that he bought one, he filled out a firearms affidavit, and the exact one that he bought was put on it. And the magistrate said you can no longer have guns, and he got rid of them. And I think Ms. Stifler said during her close, well, I mean, just because a judge tells you to do it doesn't mean that you have to do it. Sure it does. He got rid of all of them with Juan Biggerstaff, his son present, and someone from federal probation. And when you don't follow the rules, that's exactly what happens. You go to jail. And when he tested positive for drugs, because the government does a little thing called following up, they make sure you don't have your firearms when you're on federal pretrial release. You think they just take your word for it? No, they send someone to your home. They make you fill out an affidavit. They check to make sure you don't have them. They tell you you're not supposed to do drugs. When he tested positive for drugs, what did they do? They arrested him, and he went straight to jail. So this idea that they just don't follow up, or it's not a big deal, it's in conflict to their own evidence. So then he fills out the firearms affidavit, that firearm is put on there, and it's not seen again for all of these years. But they made such a big deal about it. How rare it was, how this could be the only 10 millimeter that could be involved. They went to one pawn shop. Detective Johns sent his investigators to one pawn shop in all of Jacksonville, and they found 6 10 millimeters that were sold in the recent time, 3 of which were Glock 40 Gen 4s, the exact make and model of John Biggerstaff's. Like, he laughed when he's like, you know anyone that owns a 10 millimeter? He hasn't been allowed to be around guns or people that are in possession of guns since 2016. He probably doesn't know someone who has one. We don't have to guess that people own them. 6 of them were purchased in and around the time of the homicide in Jacks Beach, 3 of which match the exact description. And when I asked Detective Johns, well, once you learned that, what did you do? Nothing. You didn't follow up? No. You didn't go interview anyone? No. Nothing. 0. When they learned that Henry Tennant had gone to a particular pawn shop and actually pawned something, did you go there and investigate to see if he got a 10 millimeter? No. Did you go to any other pawn shops anywhere across town ever? No. But they want, what's more reasonable? That maybe someone who actually got a firearm during that period of time may have been involved, or that Mario Fernandez, who not one witness, and we'll talk about John Biggerstaff, Juan Biggerstaff, and Fred Barton, not one of them said anything about Mario Fernandez, other than John Biggerstaff said, I did not give him a firearm. On March 1st, Mr. Fernandez came in and he gave a voluntary interview. You know, because of his bank accounts, that on March 1st, he had in excess of $200,000 available to him. Hiring a lawyer is not something that he could not have done. He didn't show up with counsel. He didn't invoke his right to remain silent. He sat down voluntarily. He gave an interview. And then I asked on cross-examination to figure out, well, let's see if the guy was telling the truth. He talked a lot. You heard the interview. Detective, he told you that Jared Bridegan got into a big confrontation with Bishop Curry about the purple hair. Did you ever go and interview Bishop Curry to see if that was true? We did. And in fact, there was a big confrontation, wasn't there? Well, I don't know if it was a confrontation, wouldn't answer my question, but yes, they got into it, and Bishop Curry was not happy about their interaction. That's what Detective Johns told you. But the point that I'm making is, he went, he interviewed him, and it did, in fact, happen. It was true. He wasn't lying. AB phone call, true. The children's therapist that he talked about, Mercedes McGowan, this is a guy who's some absentee stepdad. He knows who the children's therapist is. He knows all the medications they're on. Did you find out if that was true? That was the children's therapist? We did. He admitted that it was a high conflict co-parenting situation. He didn't deny that. If he's thinking I'm the suspect in this murder or I'm involved in this, maybe I should make it seem like things weren't that bad. No, he said it was a high conflict. That's exactly what the evidence showed. As Ms. Stifler said, most people said he admitted there was some high conflict, and that's exactly what he told the police. He didn't undersell it or try to underreport. He told it exactly like it was. And he was upset that Miss Gardner and the children were not invited to Jared Bridegan's funeral after inviting Kirsten Bridegan into their home. And all of that was true. They were not invited, and they did invite Kirsten Bridegan into their home. The government, of course, talks about the motive. We talked about the family law case as to why there's no motive, and they just keep focusing on this one sentence. But I ask you to please remember that what the evidence was is that they asked him questions about Jared Bridegan. So they keep saying, well, he just kept bad talking Jared Bridegan. They were only asking questions about Jared Bridegan, and that he would give the answers. And he was saying that the children needed to be in therapy, and therapy was good for the children. And if Jared Bridegan attempted to take the children out of therapy, which they believed Mercedes McGowan was helpful, that the family law lawyers suggested that then they would file for a social investigation, and then they would move to modify the time sharing to 60-40 or something that worked better for the children. That's what the interview that's in evidence says. Don't take my word for it. That's why I took the transcript out and I read it line by line with Detective Johns. It's not just that we want decision making. And most importantly, the children were never taken out of therapy, and they never moved ever to modify the time sharing agreement. So the predicate of what this was based on never happened, and then they never took this action. So to suggest that now they would just kill Jared Bridegan because that's an easier solution, there is no evidence they had any motive to take one single day away from Jared Bridegan unless he did something that would negatively impact the children, which he decided not to do. One of the things that I'd like to also talk to you about, this jacket has no evidentiary value to whether Mr. Fernandez is connected to the homicide of Jared Bridegan. I think we can all acknowledge that. This big box of boots that you've seen us sort of manhandle around the courtroom trying to get it on, and it was brought over there, has no evidentiary value to whether Mr. Fernandez was involved in the homicide of Jared Bridegan. So why was it important? Why did I take the time to show that to you? Because all of the surveillance is in evidence. And I want you to take the time, if you so choose, to look at any one piece of surveillance that shows Henry Tennant. And I picked out for you right here, can you go back and play it one more time? What I believe is the clearest, where you can see Henry Tennant the most clear. And she just stopped it. And you tell me, after watching that video, which I submit to you is the clearest, but if there are others that you think are more clear, that you believe that you can tell that this is the jacket that he has over his shoulder, whether it's a jacket at all or a blanket, whether he's wearing white sneakers, not these boots, the purpose is they don't know. But they keep telling you these half-truths. They keep trying to get your imagination to connect the dots. So they frame a jacket that was found at Potomac and tell you, this is the jacket. They put a pair of old boots in a big box so it looks like they have a lot of evidence to connect Mr. Fernandez to this crime, to make it look like they've done their job and met their burden, when they haven't. When you look at that slide and you say to yourself, there's no way you can tell. It could be that jacket, but there's no way that we know it's that jacket. We know, there's no way we know it's the boots. Then ask yourselves, why are they doing that? Why not just say, like they did in their first close, we're not really sure, that's your job. Why not put all the jackets that they found in the garage and say, it's your job to determine if it matters what jacket he's wearing? Why not put in all of the boots that they found at Potomac and say, it's your job, you determine what boots he's wearing? They're not doing that repeatedly. They're trying to force evidence on you to get you to connect dots that simply do not exist. Detective Johns arrested Henry Tenen on August 18th, and they told Jeremy Ordway that he was arrested in connection with the murder of Jared Bridegan. And why that's such an important fact is there's a flutter of phone calls amongst Mr. Fernandez and Shanna Gardner. If he just got arrested for a driving while license suspended or revoked, there'd be no reason for a flutter of phone calls. But when they tell the current tenant that the person who is his best friend and a family friend of his father's for 20 years, which is another thing they keep telling you, like he never moved out, he just continued to stay there. His best friend moved in, a family friend of Jeremy Ordway's. That's the connection of why Henry Tenen appears at Potomac. It has nothing to do with Mario Fernandez, it has to do with Jeremy Ordway. But because they told Jeremy Ordway that, and they asked Jeremy Ordway to conduct a controlled phone call, of course there's a flutter, because they told them that they were investigating the homicide of Jared Bridegan, and it would be weird if Jeremy Ordway didn't call Mr. Fernandez and say, did you know that this has something to do with your wife's ex-husband? That makes sense. Again, this is all the jackets. This is all the shoes that they could have shown you, and they chose not to. February 8th, Mr. Fernandez's phone is seized. He was cooperative. And when they pull him over, I asked, he didn't know you were going to pull him over? No. Did you find any evidence connected to the crime? And the answer is repeatedly, no. We didn't find any evidence. And I will talk to you about the Pennsylvania trip, but they continue to show you something, and then when asked, did it connect? No. Was Mr. Fernandez cooperative? Yes. Did you get what you were looking for? Yes. And then when they arrest Mr. Fernandez, he's arrested without incident, no running, no fleeing, no violence, no gun found, nothing. Nothing that connected him to the crime of the murder of Jared Bridegan. Ms. Kudis, I don't know why the government chose not to tell you my first question. You used to have a fling with him. Yeah, that's right. But why didn't they tell you that? That's an important detail when you're judging someone's credibility. That makes more sense why he would share information with her about their high conflict. She would call him to ask his advice about her high conflict advice. And then lastly, she said, toward the end, I felt like he was sort of feeling me out to see if I was interested in a relationship again. Doesn't that make more sense when they used to be in a relationship, and then when it turns out that she really wasn't interested, they didn't have that much more contact anymore? But she doesn't report him to law enforcement. She doesn't call and say, hey, he said some weird things about his marriage. No, Law enforcement shows up at her house, and they ask her questions about the homicide, and then she's like, yeah, I did know Mario Fernandez, and she says, which are from conversations that were years prior that she never wrote down and admitted they were not verbatim. She commented about some contract in the marriage, and I said, did you know that they had, I probably said prenup by accident, a postnuptial agreement? That's a contract. No. Did you know that he was the trustee of the family trust? No. She said there was some issue between the Gardner family, yes, the very wealthy people, and him being the trustee. That makes perfect sense with the limited information that she had, is that he was the trustee of the family trust. Then you heard from Mr. Quiroz. Someone will have to explain this to me one day. They tell you that one day Mr. Fernandez he Googles a place that he's heading, which I think is pretty consistent with what people do. Then he goes up to North Carolina. Mr. Quiroz tells you, he texted me a few days before. He said, hey, I'm coming up that way. Do you want to get together? They go to Ruby Tuesdays. He uses his credit card. They go to dinner. He uses his phone. He doesn't turn his phone off. He doesn't have a bat phone or a secondary phone. He says, I'm going up to visit friends up north. He ends up going up north. He stops and he buys some shampoo and toiletries at Walmart. This is somehow evidence that they took time to show you that Mr. Fernandez is connected to the murder of Jared Bridegan. This is the part of the trial, folks, where you were waiting for that shoe to drop. You had to have been thinking, all right, we've heard from this guy, we've heard from this guy. Nothing really connects Mr. Fernandez. It's got to be coming. Here's the receipt where we got the rope, the duct tape, the silencer, the gun, something that connects Mr. Fernandez to a crime. That's the part in murder trials where they're like, gotcha. You went to a random Walmart that no one thought you would be at, and you bought a bunch of supplies that are consistent with killing someone. Something that could make you think that Mr. Fernandez is connected. He was on a road trip that he had planned, that he told people about, that he used his credit card and bought his phones, and he went to Walmart and bought some shampoo. That's what they told you. And then he went to Pennsylvania, and he left, and somehow it was some big deal that he booked a hotel for 2 nights, but only stayed 1, until Mr. Hill got up there and said, what time is checkout? 11. What time does the cellular data show that he left the area? I don't know, like 7 or 8 o'clock at night. Every single one of us knows that when you go to a hotel, if you stay past, 11, 12, maybe you get an extended checkout, 1, 2 o'clock, but after you stay after that, you have to pay for the second night. So if he was in the area visiting friends and had his things in that room until a certain period of time, or whatever the case may be, decided that he likes to drive through the night because there's less traffic, so I'll sleep in, I'll stay until 7 or 8, and then he came back to Jacksonville in March. And then they just sprinkle in. That's when the twins were being interviewed. You guys have heard that. He went up there, and that's when the twins were being interviewed. Folks, what have you heard that is some negative inference that the twins said anything that would make Mr. Fernandez think that he was in trouble and would have to flee? And I don't know who flees to Pittsburgh. He didn't go to Tijuana. He didn't go to the border of Canada and camp out. He's in Pittsburgh. And then they just sprinkle in, that's when the twins were interviewed. What piece of negative information have you heard that the twins said anything that would incriminate Mario Fernandez? And the answer is none, not a peep, 0 evidence. So somehow they took time to tell you about a trip where he went to Pennsylvania and met up with a friend. And I just suspect you are wondering, why did we hear this? What was the purpose? Because as Mr. Fernandez's criminal defense lawyer, who's been on this case since day 1, I have no idea what evidentiary value him going up to Pittsburgh and coming home in March of 2022 has anything to do with this case, except for the fact that we know he bought toiletries on a road trip. Then you heard from an analyst that they flew in from Maryland to go step by step through every little piece of evidence, who just told you there's no DNA that connects Mr. Fernandez to the crime or the murder of Jared Bridegan. Bottom End. Period. Stop. Nothing. Not one piece. Then you heard from Mr. Stengel. Do you remember when the government, I keep telling you about these half-truths and not whole stories that you heard. Do you remember when the government said, and Agent Stengel, did you find a gun accessory when you went to John Biggerstaff's house? Yes, I did. Here it is. We're about to find, the shoe's about to drop, folks. We're going to get that piece of evidence. I found a gun cabinet. All right, this is the point in a murder trial where they show you that they found the gun or evidence of a gun. Nope. I have to get up on cross-examination and stand there and look at him and say, you found a gun accessory? Do I understand that you found an old, rusted-out gun cabinet on a back porch? Yes. That thing didn't even shut, did it? No. You found garden tools in it. That's correct. That was the gun accessory? That's the kind of evidence that they're showing you to try to connect Mr. Fernandez to a firearm that's phantom in this case. That John Biggerstaff had a garden tool in an old rusted out cabinet on his back porch. And then he told you that he was one of the agents that was responsible for finding the F-150 at Jimmy Jones's house. This has got to be the most inept part of the entire investigation. They want you to believe that Mr. Fernandez is somehow connected to a gun that legally had to be disposed of in 2016. But they find the number one most important piece of evidence that they had been looking for, that had been blasted out on the news. Which remember, they keep saying, well, Mr. Fernandez never reported the F-150. Well, either did the person who was in possession of it. So we had no reason to believe that he was a suspect. He was nice to us. I talked to him for like 8 minutes. He was a good guy. He's in possession of the most important piece of evidence that they found in this case. He said, you can search my house. And they don't search the house? What's more reasonable where you would find the homicide weapon located in this case? Maybe it's there, maybe it's not. But we all agree that if the truck was hidden there, the murder weapon could be hidden there. The motive could be hidden there. The reasons could be hidden there. Jimmy Jones could be involved. They have no idea. They didn't investigate him. You didn't hear from him. You have no idea the connection of Jimmy Jones to this case, other than they just want you to believe, oh, Henry Tennant asked me to keep the vehicle here, and I had no problem doing it. Case closed. It's all cool. Mr. Hill had to get up and be like, how many people have told you, you can search my car because they don't want you to think they have anything to hide, and then you find a kilo of Coke in the trunk? That happens. It does happen. No investigation whatsoever. Don't go to the pawn shops where the 10 millimeters are and ask follow-up questions. Don't go inside the home where you actually find evidence in this case. And number one most important fact of this entire scenario is that that truck at that location, Jimmy Jones's house, isn't connected to Mario Fernandez at all. Stop, period, no evidence. None. He is not connected to the place where that truck was found, and they did nothing to determine the relevance of where that truck was found. Never heard from Jimmy Jones, never searched his house. He never called it in. Then you heard from Carlos Sonny Fong. Mr. Fong calls Mr. Fernandez. That call is in evidence. Please listen to it as many times as you want, because it never says anything that they told you it says. You heard today Ms. Stifler tell you that Mr. Fernandez was willing to pay $3,000 to remove one tree. That's what she said. So how it would be unreasonable that he would pay Mr. Tennant $2,500 for tree work? Excuse my language. This is what the call says. During COVID, they wanted $3,000 to remove a tree. Fuck that. That's what he says. He does not want to pay $3,000. And then he goes on to talk about the checks. When he calls Mr. Fernandez doesn't deny. That would be great evidence. If we know there's a connection between Mario Fernandez and Henry Tenon, and then his friend calls and says, hey, man, do you have any connection to this guy? No, never heard of him, no reason. He's like, yeah, man, the guy did work for me. He was a workhorse. He did lots of work. First check, keeping up with the roof, $3,000. Not a shred of evidence in this case that Mr. Tenon didn't do roof work for Mr. Fernandez, okay? The call between Sonny Fong that they did not know was recorded was 11 months after the homicide. 11 months. Second, $2,000, landscaping clearing. Now let's hear what happened on the call.
Like, he was working for me for a bit, like, after it.
Really? For real?
Yeah, yeah. Like, he helped me, like, that's a fucking quarter-acre lot. And like, he did a lot of fucking work, dude. Like, he fucking took down trees and shit and fucking mowed that bitch, and then he did roofing. Like, I don't fucking get it.
I don't know anyone that's that good. On a call that he didn't know was being recorded, either party, 11 months later, he says, did you know him? And then he says, yeah, he did a lot of work for me. A quarter-acre lot. I don't even know if they're talking about Potomac, because Mr. Fernandez also owned Whitehorse and other properties at the time. He did a lot of work for me. Not one piece, not one tree. He mowed that bitch. He took down trees. He did roof work for me. Mr. Fernandez is so good that he had the opportunity to, on an unrecorded call, recall the exact or close to it memo lines of the work that Henry Tenon did for him after the homicide. There's not one part of that call that's inconsistent with those checks. It is the most consistent piece of evidence in this case that Henry Tenon did legitimate work for him, and they get recorded on a call talking about it. And then there's a part of the call where he's like, yeah, I don't remember everything. It would be really weird if he talked every single specific detail. The government's like, well, he didn't say the Kickstarter. I mean, we'll get to the Kickstarter checks in a minute, but I'm going to suggest to you that no one is that good. And the reasonable inference is that he actually did legitimate work for him after the homicide, because Mario Fernandez knew he needed money and Henry Tenon was willing to do the work, and he did it. In an opening statement, Ms. Stifler said, you will not hear any evidence from the downloads of Henry Tenon's phones or Google accounts that have ever had anything to do with the Kickstarter. You will see very quickly these are not legitimate payments. Again, who is this good? Scouring tens of thousands of records, we were able to show you that the week prior to Mr. Tenon receiving this Kickstarter money, he's Googling business plans for pallet companies. He then writes out a business plan. He then, while at the time period that Mr. Tenon is at the house, he gets arrested. He can't control when he's going to get arrested. A pallet truck, while Mr. Fernandez is there, pulls up in front of the house. I don't know who can plan this. I mean, this is insane. There's a Google search history of starting a company a week before he gets a Kickstarter money. Pallet trucks show up at the house and stop after he's arrested. And inside, these are the Google searches, okay, showing the business plan that he was obviously trying to impress Mr. Fernandez with by getting a little bit of money that meant nothing to Mr. Fernandez in the grand scheme of how much money he had access to. And then they've not decided to go in and show you what the business plan and the numbers were. Is this real or fake? Look at the dates, folks. Right around the time of the checks, 3/31, 4/1, 2022. At the time, no one could have assumed that they would ever find this. And look at Mr. Tenon's. It has the number of pallets. It has the unit price. It has the totals. It has the dates. It has the numbers, all consistent with what you would need, which is about $5,000 or $6,000, all listed out, all with the dates from before he got the checks to getting the checks to after he received the money. No one is this good, folks. It suggests to you that it's real, that that's what the money was for. Mr. Tenen was helping him. He was doing a lot of work for him. I'm sure if Mr. Tenen wanted to start a pallet company and Mr. Fernandez gave him some money, it was in advance for him to continue to do work for him. That's what's happening here. It's $5,000 to a guy who has access to hundreds of thousands of dollars from the trust in his own personal accounts. This is not a great deal of money to Mr. Fernandez. It was a great deal of money to Mr. Tenen, and Mr. Tenen clearly tried and did the work for the pallets in which he needed the money for. Next. Then you heard from Mr. Blythe, or Agent Blythe. It wasn't until I got up and I said, are these things peer-reviewed? Yeah. How many drafts did you do? 5. 2 finals? Yeah. And there were still mistakes on it. First-degree murder case. They're trying to put my client in prison for the rest of his life.
Your Honor, object.
Sustain.
This is a first-degree murder case. It's the most serious case that you can be indicted for in the state of Florida. There is no more serious of a crime. And they want you to believe that Mr. Fernandez's phone was off because there's one gap in data during the time of the homicide. But it's the defense that has to show you that the same records that they were relying on to come up with that information comes with a warning. The warning says, even if call records are found, which some were, there may be times when no timing advance records are available. Please use caution in using these records for investigative or prosecutorial purposes. It's exactly what they're doing in this case. They're taking one missing record, which T-Mobile tells you you shouldn't do because there are missing records. And then when I ask him about it, this is what he says. Well, on direct examination, when Ms. Stifler asked, any rhyme or reason as to why no timing advance measurements? Answer. Could be engineering product, can't map it, no location, no TA recs recording, can't say with certainty. We need certainty. The jury instruction says you have to have certainty. And yet, in this case, he cannot give you certainty as to why there's one missing TA record at that time. And then it took the defense on cross. I said there can be blocks of time where the network engineers just don't record TA for a particular market area. That's correct. And that's what they're asking you to rely on, to know that his phone was off. And then when I asked, do you know if his phone was off? No, I can't say. Circumstantially, it may have been an airplane made, or the engineers at the company, for whatever reason, just didn't receive timing records. And then when I showed all of the timing records for the whole night, I showed there's another 52-minute gap. They didn't tell you that. And I said, if you took that 52-minute gap and you put it on a slide, wouldn't it look identical, that there's no information? Yes. So what does the government do? They get up in their first close and they say, I wish they would have mapped that because there could be another reason why at that time period it connects Mr. Fernandez to the crime. No, it doesn't. T-Mobile doesn't get records timing advance all the time. There are gaps for engineering reasons. Exactly what Agent Blythe told you. Blocks of time where the network engineers just don't record TA records. T-Mobile tells you that with a warning, and then all the records show. But they didn't show you other nights. Mr. Hill got up and he asked a witness later, did you look to see if there were identical times where there were no records for that time period? Yeah, I found 4 other ones with the exact time period. Now, there were some calls and texts during that time, but the phone had no TA records 4 times, 30 days prior, 30 days post of the exact time. And they want you to look at the jury instruction that says a forced doubt, an imaginary doubt. They're asking you to create evidence in your mind that doesn't exist. The evidence is you can't use it because it's not reliable and it's not used for prosecutorial purposes. That's why T-Mobile didn't come into this courtroom and tell you anything. He can't say whether Mr. Fernandez and Henry Tenen were even together on January 29th when they arrive at Potomac. Henry Tenen is there. Mr. Fernandez arrives, and when I said, do you even know if they're there at the same time? I can't say for certain. They could have been. I asked Detective Johns, you don't know that they were there at the same time. Could have been. And I'm like, what's the opposite of could have been, Detective Johns? That they could not have been. I mean, how hard was it for me to get that out of him? They don't know. The technology isn't that good, but if they were there together, it's like a minute or 30 seconds max. Otherwise, they're just two ships passing in the night. And why would there be two ships passing in the night on January 29th? Because it's 2 days after Mr. Fernandez signs the lease with Jeremy Ordway, and all of the things were being moved to the garage. It's not at all unusual that a landlord would go at the end of the month when there's a new tenant coming in and an old tenant leaving and moving all of his stuff to the garage to make sure the house is in whatever order the new tenant expected it to be in, or for the other 20 times in one singular month that we know Mr. Fernandez went there to do work. And we know that he was there when tenants were there and when they weren't there, because we pointed out every time a tenant would leave or come. And we also know that on the next date that we're going to talk about, Agent Blythe agreed that there were times when on the 15th, when Mr. Fernandez was at the house, Mr. Tenen left 29 minutes before Mr. Fernandez did. So there's plenty of facts to suggest that Mr. Fernandez would be there when Mr. Tenen was not. And Mr. Agent Blythe, again, found no evidence that Mr. Fernandez or his device was ever with Henry Tenen when Henry Tenen was doing whatever it is that he was doing on that day connected with the homicide. This is the night of the homicide, and what Agent Blythe talked about is that there's no evidence that his device ever left his residence, and we talked about whether his phone was off or not and the certainty in which he could say that. Now, this is the part of the trial, if you recall, where I brought to your attention that Henry Tenen had two phones. And then I talked about where those phones connected and that they were separated. And that common sense would be that if at some point in time they were calling each other, they weren't together. So whoever was involved in this homicide that night with Henry Tenen had the other phone. If they want you to believe that Mario Fernandez was that other person, although there is no evidence to believe that, why would Mr. Fernandez turn off his phone? He had no history of turning off his phone, and Henry Tenen would have given him the other phone. It doesn't make any sense. They're just asking you to fill in gaps because they can't do it. The other person had Mr. Tenen's other phone. That phone connects over by Mojo's, and there's not a suggestion in the world that Mario Fernandez was ever anywhere out of his home on that night. You heard from Mrs. Butler. She's the one who said that Mr. Fernandez deleted a bunch of stuff from his phone right before his police interview. We know that Mr. Fernandez was involved in a sex tape and had lots of personal things on his phone. He cooperated. He gave his DNA. No reason to believe a person would not expect that they would ask for the phone. Why they didn't ask for his phone, that's your decision to make as to what kind of thorough investigation they did. They don't know what he deleted. They don't know if it was porn websites, which you saw Ms. Butler. She said, look at all these things he deleted. I saw you guys leaning in and looking. You saw the contents of the websites that he deleted. All reasonable things that if law enforcement was to take your phone, you may not want really the world to know what you're looking at in the privacy of your own home. But not a shred of evidence with all of her detail, with how good she was, with the precision that she was able to go through these records, that anything that was deleted had anything to do with the homicide of Jared Briding. Next. Next. Oh, she talked about the search of John Biggerstaff, the thumbnail that she says that she doesn't know whether he clicked on or not. And it wasn't even the right firearm. It was the 9mm as well, and all the other searches that John Biggerstaff either looked at or had thumbnails of. And you heard from Mr. Ostertag. He's a JSO detective. He was in the digital forensic, and the big theme that they had with him was Mr. Fernandez, he wiped his phone. So all those months later, where they never collected his phone, and when they did, he was cooperative, he turned it over, they wanted you to believe there was some evidentiary value that he wiped his phone until we got up on cross-examination. You saw us scrambling over there. I went over to Miss Day. I said, get me the date that they say his phone was wiped. I bet you there's a T-Mobile purchase. Sure enough, T-Mobile, he got a new phone. That's what happened. Everyone wipes their phone when they get a new phone. They keep saying different things like, he wiped it, he got a new phone and device, and they showed you that on T-Mobile, but he kept it. That's weird. There is no evidence whatsoever that anything was unusual other than 8 months or so after the homicide, or 6 months or so after the homicide, he got a new phone and he wiped his old phone. That's what happened. The IME numbers are totally different, and that was the evidence in this case. This is the gentleman from ATF who said that he believed it was a Glock. I'm sure it was. He believed it was a 10mm. I'm sure it was. He seemed to know what he was doing. Can't connect it to this case at all. Doesn't even know if it was a Generation 44. They make 3 different models. Can't say what model it was. Tens of thousands of 10mm Glocks in circulation since 1991. That's what he was able to tell you. Next. Then you heard from Mr. Barton. And even the government said, there's got to be truth in there somewhere. Who cares what the truth is with these 3 guys? The truth is, Fred Barton says the guns were dropped off and it was in a gun cabinet. Juan Biggerstaff says the guns were all dropped off in gun cases and appropriate gun boxes. John Biggerstaff says, I was a convicted felon, couldn't be anywhere near him, had to get rid of him. Who told you anything that any of those stories had anything to do with Mr. Fernandez? This is the part of the trial, folks, where you're waiting for the shoe to drop and you're like, all right, someone's going to take the stand. They're going to be offered immunity, which means they can't be prosecuted. They can tell you the truth. And they're going to put their chin to their chest and they're going to say, I didn't know it was going to be used for that purpose. I regret what I did, but I did give somebody a firearm, or whatever the case may be in every murder trial where they attempt or they can establish a connection between whatever evidence they put on for days at a time and the defendant. They didn't do that in this case. John Biggerstaff, first question I asked him, you heard Mr. Mizrahi ask you all these questions about your guns. Where are they? But he didn't ask him the one question, did you give Mr. Fernandez a 10mm firearm? No, I didn't. I haven't seen those guns since 2016. I asked him every which way. I even tried to trip him up. I'd ask him fast, I'd ask him slow. I'd ask him one time, then I'd ask him another time, and I'd ask him a different way. I'll let your memories reflect how many times I asked John Biggerstaff and how many different ways I asked him whether he helped Mr. Fernandez participate in this murder. His answer was no, 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 every single time. I didn't call John Biggerstaff as a witness. The government did. They're acting like we called an incredible person and you should hold that against us. They called him, and then in first closing, they got up and said, as a liar. Well, I didn't call him. He doesn't connect my client to that firearm. Maybe he is a liar. Maybe he did keep his gun. Maybe he doesn't want to be arrested for being a convicted felon and go back to federal prison. I have no idea. But the one thing I'm certain of is that John Biggerstaff, Juan Biggerstaff, or Fred Barton never mentioned Mario Fernandez in connection to that 10mm firearm. So why did they put all these people up there for one gun that's not connected to this homicide to have you learn that there is no connection to Mr. Fernandez? Ask yourself what the point of all of this was. This is a first-degree murder case. The consequences are real. There has to be evidence. There has to be connections. There isn't a single one related to John Biggerstaff's 10mm firearm or any other 10mm firearm other than one was used in this homicide, and there's not a shred of evidence that Mr. Fernandez ever owned a 10mm firearm, was in possession of a 10mm firearm, was seen in a photo with a 10mm firearm, was seen at a gun range with a 10mm firearm. Nothing. Zero. Zilch. Is he a law enforcement officer and he's credible? Is he not credible? I don't know. I didn't call him as a witness. The government did. You have to ask yourself what the purpose was and why. I don't care. He doesn't connect, other than he acknowledges that Mr. Fernandez helped him set up for his wedding. So when they say, God, it's so weird that on the 15th he would be with wrongdoers, he's not with wrongdoers. He's with a guy whose son came into town to get married, and Mr. Fernandez helped him bring tables and chairs to his wedding, confirmed by Juan Biggerstaff. That's what you learned from Juan Biggerstaff as to why Mr. Fernandez may have seen these people, Juan and John Biggerstaff, around the time of the homicide, because he got married at the time of the homicide. And you don't have to take these guys' word for it, because they think they're liars. I asked Detective Johns, did you find receipts from the tables and chair place? He's like, yes. They picked up tables and chairs. The cellular data confirmed that Mr. Fernandez was with John Biggerstaff at the tables and chairs storage place, and a delivery was made. This isn't like some made-up story. That's what the evidence is. But they don't tell you that. They tell you, well, it's suspicious the night before the homicide he was with John Biggerstaff. When they know the evidence is he was helping him set up for a wedding. It's not suspicious they'd have communications. And the school teacher didn't provide a ton of evidentiary value, with the exception of, she said, there was some theme that this was some kind of fake marriage, that from 2018 until 2022, Mr. Fernandez was some kind of contract marriage with Shanna Gardner. But he knows all the kids' medications. He does pickups and drop-offs. He goes to all the school projects and school performances. The school knows him. He was the first person with Miss Shanna Gardner to introduce themselves to the head of school. That's the purpose. That's ludicrous, that they somehow hired Mr. Fernandez and then 4 years later to do a contract killing, and he just integrates himself into the family and the schools and the communities, and that's why we called the teachers. That's why we called Ms. Orpitzberger, who also, by the way, said 7 o'clock on a Wednesday, the community would report suspicious activity. And they want you to believe there was all this suspicious activity with a truck and Mr. Fernandez running back and forth, if you want to believe that theory. Next. Then you heard from Detective Chris Johns, who went through the financials, and you heard Mrs. Stifler in her opening statement, and this could not be more important, and she looked at all of you. I saw many of you write it down. It will be in your notes, because I watched you, because when I heard the words come out of her mouth, I can tell you I know this case pretty good. I know the evidence in this case. I know the records. And when I heard the words come out of her mouth, I almost fell out of my chair. You heard what she said. There is... Wait.
A week after Jared Bridegan's death, the
Yeah, I-
government
Okay, hold on. Pause. Let me pause it. Let me see. Whenever you're ready.
Let's not let this fact get lost. I know this case. I almost fell out of my chair. It would have been a horrific fact if it were true. Use your collective memories to recall what the government told you in their opening statement, to make it seem as though Mr. Fernandez gained $50,000 the week after the homicide for his heroic act of helping the Gardner Trust commit a homicide. Ms. Stifler told you, quote, a week after Jared Bridegan's death, the defendant transferred $50,000 from Shanna Gardner's trust into his own personal account. And we all know that's not true. It's not even close to true. It did not happen. It was such a big statement. I watched you all. Your notes will reflect. And it's not true. And I spent the time going through with Detective Johns, statement by statement, to show you there was no $50,000 transfer. There wasn't a $10,000 transfer, a 20, a 30, a 40. There was nothing but 2 transfers, one of $1,500, one of $1,800, and maybe another $1,000. And when I asked him, do you know if those went to Mr. Fernandez? He would say, no, I don't know. He has all of Mr. Fernandez's financial records. If those did go to Mr. Fernandez, he would know it. The evidence is that that did not happen. Mr. Fernandez, think about if they had told you this. No one would have wrote it down because it wouldn't have been important. Mr. Fernandez took $50,000 of his own money and transferred it to a joint account of First Choice Home Rentals so that he could pay for a $15,000 air conditioning unit and the checks that he wrote to Henry Tennant. There wasn't enough in the account. All Mr. Fernandez did was transfer money that he had in his account, hundreds, I think it was $212,000 or $160,000, and he moved $50,000 to the business account. It covered all the expenses, and then he moved the remaining balance back to himself. What benefit did Mr. Fernandez get from the transfer of that $50,000? And the answer is zero. It was his money, and he covered expenses to his premarital rental property. That's what happened. And you have to ask yourselves when you go back and deliberate, why did they tell me that? This case is like 3.5 years old. They have to know what money was moved. Why did they tell me that in opening statement? And then gauge the rest of the evidence that you heard to determine if that was credible. How many times did they tell you, we don't know where Mario Fernandez was during the homicide? And then there's no evidence of who was driving the blue F1 Ford 50 the night of the homicide. And then in her closing statement, she told you 2 things. She said, go to the next slide. I think it may be on there. Well, I'll get to that. And I'm jumping the gun on the slides, but I'll skip, I promise, when I get there. She told you an opening statement that 2 people can keep a secret if one person's dead, which means that 2 people who are alive can't keep the secret, right? That's what the saying is. Then today, she told you it had to be Mario Fernandez because it was mutual destruction between Henry Tennant and Mario Fernandez. Those are 2 completely different concepts. 2 people can keep a secret if one is dead, and it's mutual destruction. And then we don't know where he is, but he's in the blue truck. 2 totally different concepts. And then Ms. Stifler gave you this whole example about how it had to be Mr. Fernandez in the blue truck because it was mutual destruction. There's only one person Henry Tennant would trust, and it's got to be Mr. Fernandez. Has to be because no one else would get involved. No one else could take the chance to get caught. Has to be Mario Fernandez. And then about 30 minutes, and right before she closed, do you remember what Ms. Stifler said to you? Well, of course there's no DNA. Of course his hair's not in the truck. Of course there's no surveillance because he's an architect of the crime. And architects hire the painters. Of course you don't have paint on your hands if you're not a painter. Of course people that hire people to commit crimes, cowards, they hire people to commit crimes so their DNA is not at the scene. So their hairs are not in the Ford F-150. So they're not caught on surveillance. Well, which one is it, folks? Is it that Mr. Fernandez has to be in the truck because he's the only one that Henry Tennant would trust? Well, that's not good. That doesn't fit the evidence because there is no DNA. He's not caught at the scene. He's not seen on surveillance. Not a shred of evidence connects Mr. Fernandez. So let's pivot real quick. He's the architect. He's not in the truck. He probably is at home. We don't know where he is because he paid for it. They told you two completely separate theories. Why? And the answer is because they don't know who is involved. And when you don't know who is involved, you don't know what happened. You don't know who's connected to Jared Bridegan. You don't know who's connected to Shanna Gardner. You don't know who's connected to Shanna Gardner's family. You don't know. So they just say, well, it has to be him. He's the only connection. That would only make sense if they knew who was involved, and they don't. Henry Tenen is not dead. They told you he's dead to you. Two people can keep a secret if one is dead. He's not dead. He's alive and well. You just didn't hear any evidence from him. He just didn't come in here and tell you that Mario Fernandez paid you. You just didn't hear that. But it's not because he's dead. He's alive and well. The government just didn't put that evidence on. Ms. Gardner was mentioned 26 times in the opening statement, and you didn't hear anything about Ms. Gardner in this case. You think maybe there's another part of this story that you don't know? And if you don't know all the facts, how are you supposed to determine if Mr. Fernandez is the only link to Jared Bridegan? They're desperately clinging to that fact. That's how they want to win. All this stuff, the totality of the evidence, makes only sense that it's Mario Fernandez. Except for if you go back there and go, we don't know who's in the truck. We don't know how Ms. Gardner's involved. I didn't bring up Ms. Gardner. The state did 26 times in their opening statement, and you didn't hear anything about her during this trial. How are you supposed to convict Mr. Fernandez of first-degree murder and solicitation to commit first-degree murder when you don't know who is involved? The answer is you cannot.
We can't present that evidence.
Talked about the date of crime and what evidence you heard. I'm not going to go over that again. We talked about weighing the instructions and whether the witnesses were straightforward, and I'll ask you to consider that when the judge reads it to you. There's another jury instruction that says the number of witnesses and the number of exhibits is not what counts. This whole stack of evidence that's been in front of you for the last 6 days, these framed jackets and these framed shell casings and the keys to the truck, just because there's a lot of it, and just because they called more witnesses than we did, the judge is going to instruct you that you have to weigh the evidence, not the number of witnesses and not the number of exhibits. Mr. Fernandez elected not to testify in this case, and I spent a great deal of time in jury selection speaking to each and every one of you about many different reasons why a person would not testify in their own defense other than the fact that they are not guilty. The judge is going to read you that the Constitution requires the state to prove its accusations against the defendant. Mr. Fernandez has a constitutional right not to take the stand in his own defense, and you cannot consider that in your deliberations. I asked you in jury selection that if anyone were to go back there and do that, and you all agreed that would be unfair, that you would follow the law, that you would not allow your other fellow jurors to consider that or talk about it if the judge in fact instructed you on it, and she is going to. And I hope that you will hear that objection, you will understand why a person who is not guilty, in fact, a person who is innocent and did not participate in this crime, still may have elected his constitutional right to not take the stand. And that's why I spent so much time in jury selection talking about why a person may not do that and getting you all to agree and understand that it's not because he's hiding anything. It's because he has a constitutional right that he's exercising. These have been behind you the entire time. I asked you at any given point to look and say, with the totality of all of the evidence that you heard during the course of the 6 days and the evidence that I reviewed with you this afternoon, what evidence was there that Mr. Fernandez wanted Jared Bridegan to die? The answer, none. What act did he do? What did he say that was intended to aid or to incite, cause, encourage, assist? The answer is none. I showed you every witness. I showed you a picture of every witness. We went through and talked about it. I know I didn't talk about everything they said, but I'm telling you that your collective memories will reflect that there was no evidence that Mr. Fernandez wanted him to die. There was no evidence that he said anything to Henry Tenen to cause him, encourage him, or assist him. And then for the criminal solicitation, next, that he solicited Henry Tenen prior to February 16th. What witness? What evidence? The checks were for legitimate work. They were post the homicide. They're going to keep harping on these checks. There's no check in November. There's no check in December. There's no check in January. There's no check in February. 2 checks in March, 1 check in April. That's it. That's what they're going to tell you is the circumstantial evidence that he solicited someone. Henry Tenen committed this crime on credit. Murder for credit. It just doesn't happen, folks. There's no financial transactions to support circumstantially, and there's no evidence or testimony to suggest that Mr. Fernandez did something or said something to Henry Tenen. None. It doesn't exist in this case. And lastly, we get to the reasonable doubt instruction. And a reasonable doubt as to the guilt of the defendant may arise from the evidence, meaning that what you heard is not consistent with a crime. The evidence in this case is that Mr. Fernandez wrote Mr. Tenen some checks for legitimate work that he did. Mr. Fernandez owned Potomac, and that's why he was there. The evidence that we saw was that he would go there regularly. He had a legitimate reason to be there. He would go there twice in a day. He had no contact with a 10-millimeter firearm. All of the reasons that the evidence that you heard would give you doubt that he was involved in a first-degree murder or solicitation to commit murder. That's what that instruction is telling you to look at. Or it's telling you, don't look at the evidence, or look at the evidence, and look at the lack of evidence. What connection is there to a 10-millimeter firearm? None. What evidence is there that Mr. Fernandez asked, did something, said something to Mr. Tenen? There is none. What evidence is there that Mr. Fernandez intended or wanted Jared Bridegan to die? There is none. That's a lack of evidence. And if you go back then, you're like, they just didn't prove it. I was just waiting to hear one piece of evidence that would make me know. That's what that jury instruction says, is that the 3 things that you use are the evidence itself, which in this case should give you reasonable doubt. The lack of evidence, which in this case certainly should give you lots of reasonable doubt. And then there's a conflict in the evidence, when the evidence just doesn't line up. When one witness says the guns came in a lockbox, and another witness says they came in gun cases, no witnesses say that Mr. Fernandez had anything to do with the firearm. That's a conflict in the evidence that doesn't make sense. Conflicts in this case, there's no DNA in the blue truck, but the government wants me to believe that he's in the blue truck. There's no fingerprints in the blue truck, but they want me to believe he's in the blue truck. There is no physical evidence that ties him to the scene, no surveillance, no eyewitnesses, nobody that puts him outside of his house on that night. But they want you to believe that he's running from his house to the truck, to turn back off his phone, to run back later in the night, to hand back keys. I mean, you heard that today. There's like, what evidence is there that Henry Tenen needed to get keys from anybody else other than the driver of the blue truck? So they just throw it out there. That in and of itself is a conflict because the evidence doesn't support that he ever left his house. And if that gives you any doubt, just one singular doubt, that you aren't convinced that every single one of you knows with every fiber in your body. You heard Mr. Mizrahi say in jury selection, it's been referred to as an abiding conviction of guilt. This is the highest standard. Being convinced. And I spoke to you about probable cause. It's the lowest level of proof in this country. To arrest somebody, to pull them over, it is literally by law, the lowest standard of proof we have in this country. And how many times has the government told you in this trial that they believe other people are involved, like John Biggerstaff, that he's lying to you, that he gave him a firearm? They haven't arrested John Biggerstaff. How unfair is it what they're asking you to do? They're asking you to go back in this room with the highest level of burden of proof, the toughest burden of proof that we have in this country, beyond to the exclusion of a reasonable doubt. And they want you to believe that John Biggerstaff gave Mario Fernandez a 10-millimeter weapon, and they have never even arrested him. They've threatened him. They've offered him immunity, but they can't even arrest him with the lowest level. They're asking you to find that it's reasonable that he gave it to him using the highest standard. That is simply unfair. And it tells you that they cannot prove that John Biggerstaff provided a firearm. Otherwise, he would not have been in here on his own volition, walking in. He'd be a principal to first-degree murder of Jared Brightigan, and he is not. Before we move on, the word that they use is convinced. Abiding conviction of guilt is what Mr. Mizrahi referred to, and lawyers refer to that as. You have to know, and if you don't, the judge is going to tell you that if you have a reasonable doubt, you must acquit the defendant. That's what the law is. If you go back there and you're like, they just didn't connect all the dots, the judge will tell you in her words, you must acquit the defendant, meaning you have to find him not guilty. If you have one reasonable doubt, the elements we have gone over and over every time we've spoken to you. I want to point out number 4. The judge is going to tell you that the lawyers are not on trial. Your feelings about them should not influence your decision in this case. If I acted a certain way, if I was too aggressive with a witness, if you thought I was pushing Detective Johns' buttons, or I could have been nicer or more polite, I will take the criticism. I'm not the best lawyer in the world. I make mistakes. I get caught up in it. I get emotional. If you go back there and you think that something I did or Mr. Hill did, I'll concede it was probably me. In this case, was unprofessional or whatever the case is, don't hold that against Mr. Fernandez. Hold that against me. And that's what the judge will instruct you. Music to your ears. This is the last time that I get an opportunity to speak with you in this entire case. So first I want to tell you that the government gets to get up now and they get to tell you all the reasons I was wrong. And they get to tell you everything about what I said and why Mr. Fernandez is guilty, and they're entitled to do that, and I assure you Mr. Mizrahi is going to. But what Mr. Mizrahi is not allowed to do, he's not allowed to reopen the evidence. He's not allowed to give you evidence that you didn't hear. He's just allowed to argue that with what evidence they've already submitted, it's enough to convict Mr. Fernandez. That's it. That's all he can do. And before I ask you to return a not guilty verdict on all of the counts of the information, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for your attention, your candor in jury selection, your time, paying attention. It has been a long, dense few days or week, and I am grateful, but most importantly, Mr. Fernandez is grateful, because this is the most important week of his life. And on behalf of Mr. Fernandez, I want to thank you for your time and your attention. As to the verdict of solicitation, we're going to ask you to return a verdict of not guilty. As to verdict murder in the first degree, we are going to ask you to return a verdict of not guilty, because we believe the evidence in this case shows the government wholly and woefully failed in their obligation and their burden to prove to you that a crime was committed. And most importantly, it's because we believe that Mr. Fernandez is innocent, and he got wrapped up in something that he never should have been wrapped up in, that he knew nothing about. We'll ask you to return a verdict of not guilty. Thank you.